we're reviewing, not chapter 12. I'm in like standard math mode. Okay, chapter 11.6 through 11.9 test. Okay, and the first section on your test is going to ask you to determine is it a combination or a permutation, and then to answer the question. So you're going to have to listen to these. All right, here's your first scenario. At a restaurant, you can choose 2 different side dishes from a list of 10. How many possible side dish choices do you have? So again, combination or permutation, and then calculate the answer. I'm going to say the question again. At a restaurant, you can choose 2 different side dishes from a list of 10. How many possible side dish choices do you have? What should you decide, combination or permutation? Combination. So the mistake that a lot of you made on the first section was you said permutation, not combination. Like you just chose the wrong one. All right, total, then the C, then how, oh, sorry. That was a 2, not a 3. 10C2 equals, and how many combinations were there? 45. Okay, 45. 45 possibilities. Okay. Now here's your next one. An entry code into a building is a 5-digit number, and how many different codes are possible? How many different codes are possible? Make that calculation. Okay, so assuming that there are 10 buttons on this keypad, that would be 10P5, which gives me, what was it? 10P5. 30,240 possible combinations. All right, so calculating permutations and combinations. All right, first 3 questions on your test. Now, let's calculate the probability of, now would this be a disjoint or an overlapping event with this given information? Is this event disjoint or overlapping? If this is the information you're given. It is disjoint because it doesn't give me any probabilities where they would both occur at the same time. So go ahead and calculate this. Pretty easy. Now, one thing that I did see that people were doing on the quiz is for disjoint overlapping, they kind of got confused and multiplied them. But more than that, I saw people getting confused with independent and dependent. Do I multiply or add? I multiply those, but I saw people adding. Just remember, keep it different. Disjoint and overlapping, I add the probabilities together. With independent and dependent, I multiply my probabilities together. Did you get 69%? Now, some of you may have left it a fraction and forgot to change to a percentage. I will remind you of that on your test tomorrow also. Okay? So, just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so this was obviously a disjoint event. Well, now let me ask you this, okay? So you're going to have a couple scenarios tomorrow on your test where you'll be looking at the numbers on a spinner and given 2 different events. So find the probability of A or B. Okay, here's what I'm trying to find. The probability of A or B, or basically event 1 or event 2 happening. All right, find the probability. So the first thing you have to decide is, are these events disjoint or overlapping? What do you think?
Overlapping.
Are there any numbers on the spinner that would be a multiple of 2 and greater than 3? Yeah, so these events are overlapping. So now I need to find the probability that event 1 will occur. So I need to look at the spinner. How many numbers on the spinner are multiples of 2? 4. So I need to write that as a probability, 4 over 8. 8 being the total possible. How many numbers on the spinner are more than 3? 5. 5 over 8. Now, how many events on the spinner would be a multiple of 2 and are more than 3? How many events? 4 is a multiple of 2 and greater than 3. 6, and 8. I have 3 numbers on the spinner that are both, so I have to take those out of the total. Because remember, what I'm trying to solve for is how many are one or the other, not both. All right, so I have to subtract 3, and I get 6 over 8, which is 3/4 or 75%. I have a 75% chance of landing on a multiple of 2 or a number more than 3, but not both. All right, any questions? Any questions there? All right, so that's overlapping and disjoint. What about independent and dependent? Okay, so I'm going to give you this scenario, because this scenario is the one that I saw most people miss on the quiz yesterday. And again, some people missed it because they added these probabilities instead of multiplying. Remember, with independent and dependent, I multiply the probabilities together. So here I have gumballs. I'm picking gumballs out of a machine. There's 100 green, 52 red, and 45 white gumballs in the machine. I pick one and I do not replace it. Again, that is my key. Okay, into is it independent or dependent? Go ahead and calculate. What's the probability I pick green then red, and the probability that I pick white then white? Okay, so what's the probability that I pick a green? Probability of green? 100 over 197. What's the probability that I would then pick a red? 6. You've got to reduce the total. And I had a question last hour, and it was definitely relevant and something maybe I hadn't given a lot of thought to. If you put 197 on accident...
Do I need to know for sure or no?
Okay, so your work is very important. For the most part, since I got onto you guys' last test about that, you guys have been really good about showing your work, but this is just a reminder to you. Your work is important. If you don't show your work, technically you could treat this as independent and your answer is still close enough that when you round it to the nearest percentage, it would still be the correct answer. So I've got to see this, the 196 in your denominator, to know that you're calculating dependent events. Does that make sense? Okay, so now when you multiply them and round to the nearest percentage, did you get 13%? Yes. All right. Now, if you're trying to pick the same color the second time, like white and then white, okay, well, your first option is still the 45 over 197, but what would your second fraction be? 44 over 196. Now I have to take one out of my numerator because I picked a white one first, and I'm trying to pick another white one. Same thing if it was a third one. Then it would be 43 over 195, and then it would just keep going depending on how many gumballs I'm trying to pick out of the machine. Did you get 5%? Yes. 5%? Okay. So on this test, it was kind of difficult to come up with 20 questions, and 20 is kind of my bare minimum for tests, so I can count them at least 4 points apiece. So what I did was I came up with some review questions from Chapter 9. Now, I think it's important, especially at this point in the year, to start reviewing anyway, since we're coming up on finals in just 4 weeks. So I'm going to give you some review questions on your test tomorrow. We're going to practice those type of questions right now. Find the distance and the midpoint of the ordered pair. Find the distance and the midpoint. Rack those brains. Come up with your formulas. Find the distance and the midpoint of these two ordered pairs. So to find distance, I got my formula. x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. I subtract and I square. Now, remember about squaring negative numbers. If you're doing that in your calculator, make sure you put it in parentheses. Otherwise, your calculator thinks the answer is negative, and it's not. Okay, so it will give you a wrong answer if you forget that. So when you square it now and take the square root, it's actually just 170. Why? Because there are no perfect square factors in 170. So that's your answer. Do not change it to a decimal. Leave it under the radical. All right. Did y'all get square root of 170? Yes. Okay. What about midpoint? What's my formula? I add my x's together and divide by what? 2. And then I add my y's together and I divide by 2. X1 plus x2, y1 plus y2. And here I'm going to get a decimal. Decimals are okay, improper fractions are okay. Do not write your answers as mixed numbers. Okay, because remember, this is a rise over a run scenario. Technically, I think if I were to pick one format for an answer, I would probably pick the improper fraction, but a decimal is okay also. Either one would be fine. All right, so now I give you a fraction to simplify. All I'm going to say is simplify the expression. So you're pulling out your perfect square factors. You're leaving under the radical anything that's not a perfect square. Your calculator can compute the number parts of it, but you have to decide on the variables which ones you can pull out and which ones stay underneath. Okay, so when I take the square root, did you get 2c square root of 30d over 9? Okay. All right, last thing. How can you tell whether or not this is a right triangle? If I give you these 3 dimensions, how can you tell? Plugging into Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. If both sides equal, then yes, they form a right triangle. If they don't, then the answer is no. Go ahead and try to solve that. Guys, I'm recording. Okay, so when I square them and I add them together, they're not equal. Remember to answer the question on your test tomorrow. The answer is yes or no. So your work is to show they're not equal, but then your answer is yes or no. All right, so if you understand that, this should be everything you need to know for your 11.6 through 11.9 test.